You're listening to the Plate Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Plate Podcast. I'm Sanjana James. Today I'm with Pranoy Thipaiah, the man behind Chikmagalur's Kerehaklu estate. If you've ever tasted a perfectly creamy Indian avocado or spotted Kerehaklu's coffee at fancy roasters abroad, chances are that Pranoy had something to do with it. He's built an avocado supply chain from scratch, pushed Indian specialty coffee into international markets, and is on a mission to prove that farms here can be both commercially sharp and rooted in biodiversity. Pranoy studied biology in Sydney, but now his real classroom lies in the Western Ghats, where he's constantly experimenting with coffee fermentation, documenting the wild world around his estate, and walking the farm with his dog Kiwi. Welcome, Pranoy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This video is supported by Zerodha01 Media Network.
So to start with, I sort of want to jump straight into why I wanted to have you on the podcast, which is most Indian farms don't really think about brand positioning. And you're the fifth generation at Kerehaklu. What was the turning point for you when you decided to turn Kerehaklu as a brand instead of just running it as an estate?
I think I lived overseas and studied in Australia for a bit, and I think I came back and I realized there's a huge gap in the market. And so, yeah, there's an opportunity to brand or storytell, but also have a legitimate transparency angle of what exactly is going on at the grassroots. And so, yeah, I thought that just by showing people the good, bad, and the ugly of estate rural life will go a long way. And yeah, so far so good.
You use like quite a bit of infographics, colors on your branding. So what's like maybe the few non-negotiables for you at Kerehaklu as a brand?
I think we need to stick to a similar path all the time. I've had various graphic designers, illustrators over the last 6-7 years, but building a theme and a consistent theme just helps with, for me, brand recognition in particular. Like, for example, our mascot on our logo is the greater racket-tailed drongo, and it's something that I'm hoping if someone sees a drongo somewhere, they might associate it with us, or there's a specific color, a tone of green that we use a lot. And so I'd say those are non-negotiables, but at the same time, having a voice. I think it's really important to have an angle that you stick to and continue to have, because otherwise you won't really get anywhere as a brand.
What does it mean to have a voice?
Quite honestly, it's my thought process in many ways that's coming out on Kerehaklu's channels and socials, because and it's just the way maybe myself and my family view farming and conservation, and also at the same time we have cabins, and so we host people, and so it's a holistic approach, but also it's just the way I've been brought up to respect the ecosystem around us while farming, and so also maybe a curiosity angle, which I think people, and it's fair to assume most people who follow us are in urban backgrounds or cities, and so maybe filling them in while we go along, that's really helped.
But did you guys have a brand before you went back to the farm?
So apart from the cabins, nothing else was branded so much.
So why did you think that branding was so important, and what's the difference it's made since the first probably idea of branding?
I think it's everything. It's if you don't have a significant sort of name or once again a philosophy, it gets drowned out in so much noise and background noise. And so being in Sydney, seeing, you go to every roaster there, and there's growers from Colombia and Guatemala, and their family names and farm or estate names, and I really wanted to do that with Indian coffee. And so that was an inspiration.
Yeah. And how has it changed since you started branding, and now I think you've come a very long way from your first brand?
I think at the start I was taking maybe the biodiversity angle a lot more, which So I would name coffee processes after different species that we find at Kerehaklu. Now I am focusing on Kannada, the language a bit more, the people a bit more holistic, because yes, the biodiversity angle is still a part of it, but I feel like now it's more, I want to make it relatable to people. And so I think that's what's changed, yeah.
And how have like people and buyers responded to the branding?
I think it's been great. It's what's set us apart in many ways, because it really helps. Let's say it's a coffee roaster in New York, or let's say in LA. For them, the quality has to speak for itself first. The coffee in this case has to be really good. But if they know that, hey, I'm going to put this up for sale, and if they're able to tag an account like mine, Kerehaklu, where anyone in the US, for example, can click on it and be like, okay, these guys are legit, it helps a lot.
And what do you think, like most Indian, because we have so many, I think right now the specialty coffee market's quite big in India, but what would you say something they're doing wrong? Because your branding is like very starkly different from anyone else I've seen, and that's the reason I wanted to have a chat with you. So what would you say is like people either doing something wrong or they should be doing differently?
I think we haven't educated enough. We've gone to step 3 without explaining what step 1 is. So, for example, on a bag of coffee, it'll say tastes like mulberries and black tea and jaggery, but people have no idea what that means.
What does it mean?
That's yeah, exactly that. And so, basically, they're what we call sensorial precursors. And so, I get these tasting notes, and so. When you roast and we do this process called cupping, which is a sensorial analysis, it works in your brain, and like when you go wine tasting, you can get notes of other kind of things, like mulberries or whatever. Same thing in coffee, and actually in coffee you can get more tasting notes than wine. And so, but yeah, going back to your question, I think people often ask me, did you add a syrup or did you infuse that taste? And I always encourage people to ask. I always say ask. It's better to know than assume the wrong thing. But I think as an industry, we haven't educated people to be like, why does it taste like this? What does it mean to have these notes? Those little things which, yeah, I think we need to do.
So are they actually infused with the flavors you've mentioned, or?
No, like those are actually notes that you get within a cup of coffee. Like, for example, the coffees that I produce, it's a process called the wash process. I get a lot of tea notes. It's black tea, white tea, sometimes like a jasmine tea. And so it's actually, what does it remind you of? Is a good way of thinking of it, where it could be it's something else. So your mind is constantly archiving tastes that you've had for up until this point of your life. Yeah.
I think I want to go back a little bit to understand what really inspired you to come back to the farm.
Yep.
Like the journey of it, and also what were your dad and your granddad doing at the farm. So I'm guessing they either grew a lot of Robusta before.
So yeah, honestly, no. I think we grew a lot more Arabica then as well, because yeah, the climatic patterns and conditions were a lot more predictable, which makes Arabica a little more easier to grow. But then when I've come in, I've been what we call processing our coffees, or post-harvest processing them. And so that's a very quality focused, a quality driven approach, where that comes under specialty coffee. And so the tasting notes which I just mentioned, those are big parts of it. But then also these coffees are dried very carefully, so have a long shelf life and are giving a roaster and then a barista and then, or even a home brewer, more opportunity to sort of enjoy this for a longer time.
So how have your buyers changed since, because the estate size still remains the same, right?
Yep.
So who are the buyers now as compared to when your dad was growing coffee?
So about 90% of our coffee this harvest that just finished was exported. 10% remained in India. I'm actually in the process of setting up my own micro roastery, which will allow people to buy coffee directly from us. And so, yeah, before that, there wasn't much coffee being going to roasters. It was going to an aggregator. And so when that happens, it's mixed with other coffees from the area and bulked and sold further on. But now we're really transparent about this coffee came from this block, which was planted in 1994, for example. And so that angle has helped us a lot.
So traceability matters quite a
Yep.
bit. But is that still important in India, or would
Yeah, I'd say like being specific goes a long way. I give a lot of details when someone sources a coffee from us. I give the history of the plants, what year it is planted for us. It might seem excessive to some people, but I also give, I'm like, okay, the canopy has jackfruit and figs, but then we also see things like giant Malabar squirrel and in the canopy. And so all of those things actually have effects on the taste of coffee. But more than anything, I'd like to paint a whole picture for a roaster or a potential roaster about where that coffee came from.
So you're exporting 90% of what you're growing.
Correct.
But from what I understand, like, Indian coffee that's exported is usually the cheapest. And especially, I think we export a lot to Germany, and they consider it as like the worst of the lot. It's when nobody else is buying anything else they
Yep.
buy. So how did you break into this premium market?
It's hard, and like you said, there's a lot of so what we do is specialty coffee, and then there's also commodity or commercial coffee. And so, yeah, India in many parts of the world is known for that filler coffee or blending coffee, and that's a tough reputation to shake off. Where people associate you with low quality but high volume.
Why is that though?
That was the case. I can't deny that that's what India did, and maybe even still do, because so much of it is just high volume and able to, let's say, an espresso blend where someone is buying a good coffee and wants to blend it with an okay or a not so good coffee. But it's roasted so dark that you can't even really get the taste. You just want a bitter coffee that you can have with milk. And so a cappuccino, you can assume some people have it with sugar. And so, but there's other people like myself who are changing that narrative. It's sort of, quality driven, but a direct trade approach.
But how did you do that? Like, were you making trips, what was your sale process from sampling to closing a deal with a roaster?
So in India, I first started supplying only to roasters in India. And I started off 2018, this Instagram page where Kerehaklu's Instagram, where I was really open about what I was doing and open about, hey, I'm learning. I don't pretend like I know everything. You can learn with me if you want. And funnily enough, I met a lot of roasters, or got introduced to a lot of roasters, because I would just research a lot and see who the founders are and the big names, and I would go and like all their profiles, and I got 4 or 5 people to follow me back, and then I was like, can I send you a sample? And I feel like they had a hunch. They were like, this guy's onto something and it's different. But then I had to back it up. This sample had to be as good as I was claiming for it to be. So that was India. We grew steadily from there. But overseas, yeah, I went to a lot of conventions and expos. And so Melbourne, London, New York, where I wanted to get our coffees out there. A lot of the time, it's you have to physically be there to build the trust, build a relationship, because there's a chance you just want to sort of help the roaster or the potential roaster be confident about the coffee that they're going to buy and not have their hands burnt in the process.
But even though you have the quality, you think Instagram and social media helped you the most to sort of break this?
Originally, yeah. I think originally, yes, it helped to, just be among households, to roasters, to chefs, have them know, and also I'd like to think educate them about what happens, because I'm a firm believer that people don't know what happens on a farm, and that's what I'm here to tell them about, because It could be too much rain, it could be too little rain, and even something as little as your tractor breaks down and what effects that has on your day or your week. And so,
There's been an interest in that
yeah, yeah,
amongst
yeah.
you.
I'm lucky and privileged to be out and about, but this is what's going on now.
Okay. So Karnataka grows more than 90% of India's coffee. And I'm confused that what would you say, like what's the difference between Coorg or Chikmagalur coffee, or what's better?
I don't know what would be better, and I don't know if that's a diplomatic answer. And the reason I say that is because now, with the advancements in fermentation and technology that we have, everyone is good, to be honest, or can be good. You know, it's really up to them on what they choose to do. You could say Chikmagalur has a small advantage because if you go back in history, Baba Budan brought the coffee beans to Chikmagalur. So it's the birthplace of coffee in India. But that's not to say there's not good producers in. There's Hassan and also Hassan, Belur, and Coorg or Kodagu. There's a lot of good coffee coming out of there as well.
But what's the difference in growing patterns? Like, or is terroir making the difference in taste, or maybe is it kind of the biodiversity around these estates? How does it differ?
The elevation is a big one. On average, I think Chikmagalur, it's safe to say, is a bit higher elevation. But of course, there's exceptions to that. And the soil as well. And so if you look at the Giris in Chikmagalur, it's a very sort of iron-rich soil. So it's red, which we have some of as well in our area of Aldur. But we also have a blacker, deep brown sort of jungle soil. And so all of those things matter. Also the rainfall. So there's a lot of things that come into it where, yeah.
I think in 2016, you guys went completely chemical free, and you're very big on your biggest sales pitch is like being very rooted in agroforestry. What do these actually mean for coffee? And also, I want you to touch upon the EUDR regulations recently. How does it sort of affect the larger export industry in India?
Sure. So, I mean, going to your agroforestry part of the question, in India, a huge shade tree, as we call them, is silver oak. It's a part of the Gravelia genus. It's not native to India, and it was popularized by the British many decades ago. That was used for two things. It grows fast and straight, and it actually it allows us to grow pepper vines along the bark. But now we're finding out it's really harmful for the soil. It's actually leaving trace aluminium amounts in the soil. But then also, if you look at the trees, they grow straight, as I mentioned, and they sway a lot. And so there's no birds, there's no nests, there's no squirrels and other small mammals. And so my dad and granddad actually noticed that many years ago. And so if you come to Kerehaklu, we are largely indigenous in terms of the canopy. So we have 7 different kinds of fig species. We have rosewood, Indian beech, many others, which gives us quite a wild canopy. Like, I think people come and expect a sort of manicured estate where it's all in grids. They start off as grids, but the thing with figs, for example, they grow in different ways. They don't grow straight. And so that helps us. And so with the EUDR, a lot of it has to do with the amount of shade coverage that you have. And so it's probably safe to say that a lot of Indian farmers, and especially in the south, will pass these regulations. But then when it comes to sort of chemical testing in the soil, that obviously depends on them and what their sort of usage is.
What would you say, like the damage done because of silver oak? You said that people are still planting silver oak tree because it's the fastest way to get shade.
Yep.
But it doesn't sound very sustainable. So what has the damage been so far?
So the biggest and most noticeable thing is the leaves. And so they shed leaves really easily. Like, let's say another leaf that falls to the ground, in a few days it turns brown to black, and then finally it just breaks down into the soil. I've seen silver oak not degrade for weeks sometimes. And so that in itself is a sign of something going on and something wrong over there. And like we have the Indian gore, we have wild cattle, none of it will actually eat those leaves. And so it's kind of wiping away any biodiversity at the ground level. I talked about the canopy level already. You'll never see a bird or a squirrel in there. But when it falls again, it's remaining on the forest floor or the estate floor for far too long. And so it's meant to break down into organic matter and help the soil and mulch in a way. But yeah, it's something that we need to educate on.
But I think also like there's been such a big flux into everybody getting into the coffee industry in like the last 5 to 7 years, and everybody into like because of Blue Tokai and Subco coming up, everybody wants to be in Indian specialty coffee market.
Yep.
But do you think the market is saturated or?
I think there's a lot of room for more specialty growers. I think specialty makes up for a small percentage of actual coffee consumption in India. It's growing and growing in the big cities a lot. But I am happy and proud when I see farms and estates branding, because when I started off, there was no one, or there was barely anyone. But I think it's a space where we need more producers, we need more education from the producers, and forget, okay, sort of educating about biodiversity, even stories like people have old bungalows and maybe stories about tigers many, many years ago and old photographs. We have to preserve and cherish those things, because that's what's going to help us on a global stage.
But I think more and more when I look at Instagrams, everyone's like a small specialty, small farmer producing like, premium coffee. So do you think that's a facade under the name of biodiversity, or that's really happening?
I think it is happening. People are curious, and the reason is with specialty coffee, you can dictate your own prices. With commercial or a commodity coffee, there's a market rate on the day. I can go check on my phone and what's the rate, and that's the going rate I can sell it at. But if I add value by fermentation and drying and milling, all of these angles help me set a price and have a conversation with a potential buyer and be like, this is what works out for me, and I need this profit margin to put back into the estate. And so I always tell people start small, because it's a big change going from commercial coffee to specialty. It takes a lot more time. Your staff need to get used to the new protocols and processes. And so don't go all in immediately, because you might lose out in the long run. So start small and build, and then go from there. I'm sure it changes the roast process slightly, but overall, I think the quality can remain. Yeah.
I think you've been fermenting coffee, and that's sort of like the new trend in the coffee industry at the moment. What does it actually mean, fermentation? And I think you've been using microbes, cultures, koji. What does it mean?
So simply put, fermentation is the breakdown of sugars, and it can get into an alcoholic stage and also produce carbon dioxide. But you got to control that and not let it go too far. In the sense of coffee, what happens over there is that the tasting notes we talked about before, that's created when we ferment coffees. Otherwise, see, when you pick a coffee, when you pick a coffee cherry, the fermentation begins like any other fruit, like let's say an orange or a banana. It'll start oxidizing, and there's a lot of reactions going on. But we want to control that and make that happen very quickly in a controlled manner. And so with us over there, fermentation is step one, but then drying is a huge angle as well. But I've experimented a lot with fermentation, because that's something for me we haven't done in the past. It's very new to India in coffee sense. We always, at home we make this fermentation everywhere, in dosa batter, in curd, in everything. So that's where my mind sort of started getting, the wheels started turning, and I was like, okay, this is not as complicated as we think, but we just have to borrow things from various industries and sort of apply it to coffee.
Your family has been growing avocados for generations. Do you grow nine kinds of varieties? Eight.
Yeah.
So what are the varieties? Okay, tell me more about the avocados at your farm.
So that was actually started off by my granddad in the 70s and 80s.
He
And
planted avocados.
he did, yeah.
Right.
And that was because my dad and my aunts were at a boarding school in Uti. And so he would go every weekend to either pick them up or drop them off. And then he would stop off at a nursery. And after he dropped them off and the boot of the car was empty, he would fill them up with saplings. And he'd come back and get a couple guys to actually go and plant these saplings. And so, yeah, 30, 40 years later, we have many, many avocado trees. And when I came back from Sydney, avocados in Australia are huge. Every cafe you go to, they're smashed on sourdough and really expensive, to be honest. And so I was like, let's see, and I actually, how it started off was back then Facebook was more of a thing, and I posted on this foodies. It was an all-women foodies of Bangalore group, which my friend's mom told me about, and she was like, you should just post and say, I'll check if anyone wants. And so I went in my car and home delivered avocados, and then they saved my number and I would keep them updated. And yeah, fast forward, I think this is my 8th season. We've done 8.7 tons of avocados, and all over India. And so that's been a huge angle that's helped us as well.
But who were you selling to before sort of you came back from Sydney? Was there a market for avocado?
Not really. I mean, there was, I remember when I was a kid, there'd be a guy who'd show up on a bike and he'd have empty sacks and he'd go to my granddad and say, can I pick avocados? And he would fill 2 sacks full and probably pay us a couple hundred rupees.
Right.
And he would go to the local market and sell it over there and obviously make more money.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. We don't really know the value of a lot of things. And the same can be said of jackfruit, for example, which we grow a lot of. And we aren't really doing much with it. And I know a lot of other people aren't as well. And so I had a hunch that I was like, hey, you know what? I think if I can get this directly to people, I can build a new or create a new value chain which people will feel connected to. Because on Instagram, you log in and I'm putting up a video of, I'm like, hey, I'm literally picking it off the tree, putting it in crates, and now they're available for order and you'll get them within 48 hours. That helps a lot.
How many Indian varieties of avocados are you growing at the moment?
7.
7 Indian.
Yeah.
So there's 2 imported stuff.
Yeah, just one.
Oh,
Haas.
just 8.
Yeah. And so Haas actually hasn't fruited yet. There's still, maybe next year they'll fruit. But technically, none of them are Indian. They're Indian in the sense that they've been growing here for 30, 40 years, but originally they weren't from India. And so when I started off, I literally had to go to Google Scholar and look at peer-reviewed literature to identify them. And some of them may not even be 100% correct because cross-pollination happens and a lot of different things. And
what's the taste difference between like a Haas that the Gen Z and all the young people love it, and like an Indian grown avocado?
So I would say there's 3 of our varieties which are a lot like Haas, but I would say bigger. And so for me, I think that's more suitable for people. And because say it's 2 people having dinner, or you're having a guacamole, a Mexican evening, it's a lot more easy to deal with and a lot more basically what people are afraid of and talk about widely is the fat content or the oil content. They always say that Haas has the most oil content, but I don't think that's true compared to what one called Gwen and one called Hall that we grow. They're creamy, super buttery. In many ways, I work with bakers who use it as a vegan alternative to butter to make a no-bake cheesecake or things like that. And so, but I have to say there's 2 varieties, one called Reed and one called Fuertes, which is a lot smaller. They're a bit watery. They're like, and the flesh is a bit whiter as opposed to yellowish. But I tell people, I'm like, hey, this is what it's going to be like. So maybe if you want to make a smoothie or something, it's probably better off. But the other ones, the buttery, creamy ones are more versatile. You can have them on toast, in a salad, whatever you want. But that angle, I've also been like what we've talked about, tasting notes. I get tasting notes in the avocados. And so one of them, the watery one, is like tender coconut for me, while other ones are like oats or like cereals and things like that. And so, again, be as specific, and that helps people understand it better.
And currently, is your market directly like home consumers, or are you targeting more bakeries and higher-end restaurants?
To be honest, I used to work with a lot more cafes and restaurants, but I think the price angle comes in, and it's an issue or a hindrance for a lot of people, because I'll ask people will ask me, well, how much do I charge and what's the MOQ, and I give them a price, and they're like, oh, I can get avocados from Coorg or Kodaikanal for 1/3 the price. And so my response is, please get them. By all means, get them and go for it. But I vouch for my produce. This is what I've been doing for 8 years of my life and my family long before. And the quality speaks for itself. And so because of that, a D2C market has worked better, where I pack in boxes, and mainly Bangalore, all over Karnataka.
I ordered this Indian-grown organic avocado, so I thought we could talk about the taste. But the one I got was super bitter, and I couldn't even, like how you could scoop it out, I had to peel it with my knife, and it was very hard. I couldn't eat it at all. So and I think there's so many people just getting into avocado. What would you say is like happening wrong?
You need to grow well. Firstly, you need to grow in a really systematic way, space the trees out so they're getting adequate sunlight. You need to prune at certain times. That's one angle. But then when it first flowers and fruits, you got to know when it's ready for picking. And so for us, what I always tell people is, pick one fruit from a lower branch and pick one fruit from an upper branch. Keep it out. Don't keep it in the fridge. Just keep it in your fruit bowl. See if it ripens, how it ripens, and then if it ripens and let's say you cut it open and it's a bit stringy, it's probably too early. If it doesn't ripen at all, it's way too early. And so test that way. You can get a pocket refractometer, and then you check a thing called bricks of the leaves. But I'd say a huge thing which has helped us, and I feel like most people don't do, is climb the trees. So we have professional tree climbers who, in the day, their job is in our coffee estates and estates around us, they climb the shade trees and actually chop off the branches to allow more sunlight in. That's what people are guilty of in a lot of farms and orchards, almost avocado orchards, where they come in and actually shake the trees or shake the branches, and whatever falls, they put it into crates and sell that. But those fruits will never ripen well. They'll always be black on the inside or half spoiled. And you can't tell immediately. You can only tell 7 days later when they're ripe, and then people feel bad. Like you just mentioned about your avocado experience. That's honestly what's happening to a lot of people. And so I like to, again, give a note being like, hey, give it time. Sometimes the color will change, but it's still hard as a rock. So wait for it to soften. And so, yeah, the education angle, once again, is important.
What's the price difference between the avocados grown at your farm and something we're getting like on Blinkit or any other?
I think now you can get avocados as cheap as 125 a kilo. Mine are 375, sometimes 425, depending on the variety per kilo. And a lot of people, that's an immediate response is, oh, that's expensive. And yes, it is. Don't get me wrong, but there's so much work that goes into it, and once again, it's not to say that the low quality or the low priced ones are bad quality. You can still get good avocados, but there's a chance that it might not ripen at all. There might be a chance that one is really good and one's really bad. So I like the sort of, the consistency of having good quality avocados.
Yeah, makes sense. What would you say is like the hardest part of being a farmer and an entrepreneur?
It's finding that balance, for sure. I think that's my life. I'm always trying to figure out where I want to be, where my priorities are, my personal life as well. It's taken a while, but now I've hired a few people, and I have like 2 people working directly under me, for example, and one person who's in charge of events and the coffee related things, where I was a bit of a control freak when it came to my brand, because I wanted whoever represented it to know what they were talking about. And so oftentimes it was just me doing that, or I had someone helping me. But now, in order to grow as a brand and grow as a company, I've had to delegate. Overall, I think that's the hardest challenge, where we live kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so getting people to come
What's the future for Kerehaklu? Would you want to keep it premium and small, or would you want to scale it?
It's a tough question because I feel like we don't know what's coming with the climate, and so I'd rather not be naive and be like, hey, we're gonna do this for the rest of my life. There will be shocks to the system climatically, like could be pest pressure. So I still want to be able to have the premium involved, where regardless of the scale, I'm able to sort of, once again, control the price, control who it goes to, and I'm a bit picky about which roasters get our coffee. And so, yeah, it's not just the reputation, but there's quality involved in the roasting process as well. But going back to diversification, I've planted a lot more avocados now. I've planted a lot more cacao now as well. And so we'll just have to see. But once again, like all the generations before me, eggs in different baskets and see where we go.
Right. And I sort of want to go back to where we started. What would you say was like the one failure or something that didn't go right is now sort of like made a significant impact of the brand that Kerehaklu is now?
Probably, maybe not a failure because I learned from it, but the branding of pepper was a tough one for me. I thought it would be a lot easier to convince people to buy premium pepper, which we grew, but I was surprised, and I learned very quickly that everyone has pepper in their kitchens, and most of them are like an MDH or a standard brand when you buy from a spice rack in a supermarket or on Blinkit nowadays. But in order to market that, I think I had to step out of Karnataka, step out of the south where it grows, and look at markets elsewhere which still have pepper in their pantries or their kitchens, but they are more open-minded to premium pepper and more open-minded to getting something that tastes a bit more different. So that was a huge learning. I'd like to tackle that again next year through koji and other fermentation experiments by adding value. But so far, I've taken a step away because you need to go all in, and maybe I need to focus more on coffee and avocados at this point, but that's something I want to take off soon.
Is there something in terms of the visuals of branding that you would do, you were doing, and then that made an impact of who you are now?
I'd say, yeah, last couple of years, we were really kind of abstract about our storytelling and visual storytelling, where it wasn't obvious to the eye that, okay, this is coffee, where we were able, like my dad was driving his Jeep, doing rounds in his Jeep, and my dog was running along the car, and he spotted something in the corner of his eye, and it was a 12-foot rat snake eating a 10-foot rat snake, and he saw this battle go down, and so we actually put that down on a t-shirt. And it might sound weird, but like those things of not having an avocado, instead being like, there was this amazing moment that we witnessed, and we'd like to put that on a t-shirt or on Instagram posts and things like that. I think those help, and it adds a level of sort of it's like a very vivid storytelling of, for me, coexistence. It's not just about me and coffee and me and avocados. There's a snake, there's a squirrel, there's my dog, there's all kinds of things going on, and so that's life over there, and so I'd like to be able to portray that.
Yeah, sort of really giving the taste of where you're based.
Yeah.
And so but I think that's really it for today. Thanks so much, Pranoy, for joining us today.
Thanks.
And thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
For more such stories that help you understand India from farm to plate, subscribe to The Plate India.